I'll never forget the day I dug into my garden bed and came up with nothing but dry, lifeless dirt. No worms, no life, just sad, compacted soil that looked more like concrete than earth. I was ready to give up on that particular bed when a fellow gardener at my local nursery told me about something she'd been using with incredible results. I was skeptical, but desperate enough to try anything. 4 days later, I was on my hands and knees, watching earthworms tunnel through soil that had been dead just days before. What I'm about to share with you is the exact method that saved my garden and can transform yours too. The solution that changed everything for me was incredibly simple: oatmeal water. Not some fancy gardening concoction, just plain old-fashioned oats soaked in water. I took 2 cups of rolled oats, mixed them with a gallon of water, let it sit overnight, strained it, and poured the resulting liquid directly onto my struggling garden bed. The response was almost immediate, and by day 4, I had more earthworms than I'd seen in years. Here's why this works so brilliantly. Oatmeal water is essentially a carbohydrate-rich solution that feeds soil microorganisms. When you pour it into your soil, you're not directly feeding the worms themselves but creating an explosive growth of bacteria and fungi that worms absolutely love to eat. Think of it as preparing a feast that draws guests from miles around. The oats contain starches, proteins, and even some beneficial enzymes that break down quickly in soil, creating the perfect environment for microbial life to flourish. Understanding what happens beneath the surface helps you appreciate why this technique works so well. Within hours of applying oatmeal water, soil bacteria begin breaking down the dissolved starches and proteins. This microbial feeding frenzy generates heat, consumes oxygen, and releases carbon dioxide and organic acids. Earthworms are incredibly sensitive to these chemical changes in their environment. They can literally smell the bacterial bloom from quite a distance through the soil pores. Worms feed primarily on bacteria, fungi, and decomposing organic matter. When you create conditions that cause microorganisms to explode in population, worms instinctively move toward that area. In my treated beds, I noticed this migration pattern clearly. Worms that had been living deeper in the soil or in adjacent untreated areas moved into the zones where I'd applied the oatmeal water. Some were coming from several feet away, drawn by the chemical signals indicating abundant food. What fascinated me most was watching the soil structure change day by day. By the second day, the treated area felt slightly different when I pressed my finger into it, less dense and more receptive. By day 3, I could see small casting mounds appearing on the surface. These tiny piles of digested soil are one of the most valuable substances in your garden, containing concentrated nutrients in forms that plants can immediately absorb. Day 4 was when the population really peaked, and I could easily count 20 to 30 worms in every square foot I examined. Getting the mixture right is simpler than you might think, but there are a few key details that make all the difference. I use regular rolled oats, the same kind you'd eat for breakfast. Quick oats work too, though I've found rolled oats create a slightly better solution because they mincer sauper de guban cerise and bob or dillan dan lidans watan should denstar bokok bear densursai nutrients more gradually. Steel-cut oats are too dense and don't break down as readily, so I'd skip those for this purpose. My standard recipe is 2 cups of oats to 1 gallon of unchlorinated water. If you have city water with chlorine, let it sit out overnight before mixing in the oats, or use collected rainwater if you have it available. Chlorine kills the beneficial bacteria we're trying to feed, so removing it is worth the extra step. I combine the oats and water in a large bucket, stir it well, and cover it loosely with a cloth. Then I let it sit for 12 to 24 hours at room temperature. The mixture will develop a slightly fermented smell, which is exactly what you want. You're creating a mild fermentation that begins breaking down the starches into simpler compounds that soil microbes can consume more easily. After the soaking period, I strain out the oats using a fine mesh strainer or old t-shirt. Don't throw those soaked oats away though. I toss them into my compost bin where they continue adding value. The strained liquid is what you'll apply to your garden. It should be cloudy and milky looking with a mild, slightly sweet smell. If it smells strongly of alcohol or rot, you've let it ferment too long, and you should start fresh. Pour this solution directly onto your soil using a watering can, aiming for even coverage. I treat about 50 square feet of garden bed with 1 gallon of solution, pouring it slowly so the liquid soaks in rather than running off. timing your application correctly amplifies the results significantly. I've had the best success applying oatmeal water in the early evening when the soil is warm, but the sun isn't beating down directly. This gives the solution time to penetrate deeply overnight, when worm activity is naturally highest. Earthworms are most active during cooler, moister periods, so evening applications align perfectly with their behavior patterns. Before applying the oatmeal water, I make sure the soil is already slightly moist. If your beds are bone dry, give them a light watering with plain water first and wait about 30 minutes before applying the oatmeal solution. Dry soil often becomes hydrophobic, meaning water runs off, rather than soaking in. Pre-moistening ensures your oatmeal water gets down where the microbes and worms can actually access it. I focus my applications on areas where I'm planning to plant soon, or where I know the soil needs improvement. There's no point treating pathways or areas you don't actively garden. Concentrate your efforts where they'll provide the most benefit. For new garden beds or severely depleted soil, I apply oatmeal water twice a week for the first month. This sustained feeding keeps microbial populations high and maintains the conditions that attract and support large earthworm populations. Once the soil shows clear signs of improvement, thick worm populations, and better structure, I reduce applications to once every 2 weeks during the growing season. In the cooler months of fall and early spring, monthly applications keep the biological activity going without overdoing it. You'll develop a feel for what your specific soil needs based on how it responds.